The lightning split the sky like God himself was tearing the heavens apart, and Clara Foster knew she had about 30 seconds before the deluge hit her like a freight train barreling through the California foothills. It was June of 1873, and Clara had been riding since dawn from Sacramento, carrying nothing but a leather satchel with her mother's wedding ring and enough money to start fresh somewhere the creditors could not find her. Her father's gambling debts had swallowed their San Francisco home whole, and when he put a pistol in his mouth 3 weeks ago, those debts became hers in the eyes of men who did not care about legalities or a young woman's protests. She was 22 years old, and she had been running ever since. The town of Columbia sprawled below her in the valley, but she would never make it before the storm consumed everything in its path. The wind already whipped her dark hair free from its pins, and her mare danced nervously beneath her, eyes rolling white with fear. Then Clara saw it, a weathered shed standing alone on the hillside, its wood silvered by years of mountain sun and winter snow. She did not think. She just rode. The first drops hit like bullets as she dismounted, her boots slipping in the sudden mud. She grabbed her satchel and her mare's reins, pulling the frightened animal toward the shed. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and Clara shoved it open with her shoulder, stumbling inside just as the sky opened up completely. The darkness swallowed her. She could hear the rain hammering the roof like 1,000 angry fists, could smell old hay and leather and something else, something that made her freeze completely still. Tobacco, fresh tobacco smoke. "Well now," a voice said from the shadows, low and rough as creek gravel. "I was not expecting company." Clara's hand flew to the small pistol in her pocket, but before she could draw it, a match flared to life. In its golden glow, she saw him. He sat on a hay bale in the corner, long legs stretched out before him, a hand-rolled cigarette dangling from his lips. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of whiskey in lamplight. A black hat lay beside him, and his shirt was open at the throat despite the sudden cold the storm had brought. He wore a gun belt slung low on his hips, the holster tied down like a man who knew how to use it. "I am sorry," Clara said, hating how her voice shook. "I did not know anyone was here. I will go." "In that." He nodded toward the door, where rain pounded so hard it sounded like the whole world was trying to break through. "You would drown before you made it 10 feet. Besides, your horse is already settling in." He gestured with his cigarette toward the corner where her mare stood next to a tall bay gelding, both animals seemingly content to wait out the storm together. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the walls, and in that moment, Clara saw him more clearly. He had a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard, a straight nose that had been broken at least once, and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily despite the hard edges of his face. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against his sun-bronzed skin. "I am Jake Garrett," he said, and extended his hand. "Though most folks just call me Garrett, this is my shed, or was before I sold the land to a mining outfit last month. Been using it as a way station while I figure out what comes next." Clara hesitated, then stepped forward and took his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but not crushing. "Clara Foster," she said, "I am heading to Columbia. I did not mean to trespass. No trespass if I invite you to stay." He released her hand and stood, and Clara realized he was tall, well over 6 feet, with the lean build of a man who lived in the saddle. "You are soaked through. There is a blanket in my pack, and I can get a fire going in that old stove if you want to dry off. I do not want to be any trouble." "Miss Foster, if you were trouble, you would not be apologizing for sheltering from a storm that is probably going to last all night." He moved past her toward a corner where his gear was stacked, and Clara caught the scent of him, leather and smoke and something clean like pine soap. Besides, I have been sitting in this shed for 2 days waiting for a man who is supposed to meet me here. Could use the conversation if you are willing. The cold was seeping into Clara's bones now, her wet dress clinging to her skin. She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. Thank you. I appreciate your kindness. Jake pulled out a thick wool blanket and handed it to her, then busied himself with the small potbelly stove in the corner. Clara turned away, draping the blanket over her shoulders but not removing her dress. She was not naive enough to undress in front of a strange man, no matter how much her teeth wanted to chatter. "So what brings you to Columbia?" Jake asked as he coaxed a fire to life in the stove. Not many women travel alone through these parts, too many men with too few scruples. Clara watched the flames catch and grow, casting dancing shadows across the shed's walls. "I could ask you the same question. What brings a cowboy to a mining town? Who says I am a cowboy? Your hands, your boots, the way you sit your horse. You are no miner." Jake laughed, a sound that filled the small space with unexpected warmth. "Fair enough. You have a sharp eye, Miss Foster. I used to run cattle down in the San Joaquin Valley, had a small spread with my brother. We lost it last winter when the drought killed half our herd, and the bank decided they wanted their money sooner rather than later. My brother headed east to try his luck in Nevada. I came north to see if there was work. And is there some? I have been hired to track down some horses that went missing from a ranch outside town. The owner thinks they were stolen by a gang that has been operating in the area. That is who I am waiting for, the ranch foreman. We are supposed to ride out together once this storm passes." Clara pulled the blanket tighter, feeling the warmth from the stove begin to seep into her chilled skin. "That sounds dangerous. Most things worth doing are." Jake closed the stove door and settled back onto his hay bale, his eyes finding hers across the flickering firelight. "Your turn." "What are you running from? What makes you think I am running?" "Same reason you knew I was a cowboy. You travel light, you travel alone, and you have that look about you, like you are always checking over your shoulder." Clara's jaw tightened. She did not owe this stranger her story, no matter how warm his eyes were or how safe this shed felt with the storm raging outside. But something in his voice, something that sounded like understanding rather than judgment, made her speak anyway. "My father owed money to some very bad men. When he died, they decided his debts were mine. I left San Francisco 2 weeks ago, and I have been moving ever since." Jake's expression darkened. "How much?" $3,000. He let out a low whistle. "That is a considerable sum. What did he spend it on? Poker tables? Whiskey? Women who were not my mother?" Clara's voice was flat, emotionless. She had cried all her tears already. "He was a good man once, or so my mother used to say. I cannot remember that version of him. I only knew the one who stumbled home at dawn smelling like cheap perfume and cheaper gin." "And your mother, dead. Fever took her when I was 17. I have been managing my father's messes ever since, until I could not manage them anymore." The wind howled outside, rattling the shed's walls. Rain leaked through a crack in the roof, pattering into a puddle near the door. Jake reached into his coat and pulled out a flask, unscrewed the cap, took a drink, then offered it to Clara. "Whiskey," he said. "It will warm you up." Clara took it, surprised at her own willingness to accept. The liquor burned going down, but it did spread warmth through her chest like he promised. She handed it back, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "What will you do when you get to Columbia?" Jake asked. "Find work. Disappear into the crowds. Hope those men do not find me." "And if they do," Clara's hand moved to her pocket where her pistol rested, "then I will do what I have to do." Jake studied her for a long moment, and Clara met his gaze without flinching. She had learned young that showing weakness invited predators. But when Jake finally spoke, there was no predation in his voice, only something that sounded almost like admiration. "You are tougher than you look, Miss Foster. I have had to be. I understand that, more than you might think." He took another drink from the flask, then set it aside. "My father was not a gambler, but he was a drunk. Mean one, too. He used his fists more than his words, and my mother bore the worst of it until she finally could not bear it anymore. Took my little sister and disappeared one night while my father was passed out in the barn. I was 16. Found a note that said she was sorry but she could not take me, that I was old enough to take care of myself. Never saw either of them again." Clara felt something twist in her chest. That must have been hard. It was what it was. "I learned early that the only person you can truly count on is yourself. Though I will say my brother proved me wrong on that count. He stood by me when no one else would. You miss him." It was not a question, but Jake answered anyway. "Every damn day." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage. The fire crackled in the stove, and slowly Clara felt the chill leave her bones. Her dress was beginning to dry, steam rising from the damp fabric. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains like an angry god's chariot. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said eventually. "Ask away." "Why are you being kind to me? Most men would have, well, they would have different intentions." Jake's eyes found hers again, and in the firelight they looked almost golden. "My mother used to say that how a man treats a woman when no one is watching tells you everything you need to know about his character. She was right about that, if nothing else. Besides, you look like you have been through enough without me adding to your troubles." Something in Clara's chest loosened, a tension she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being decent. You are welcome." Another stretch of comfortable silence fell between them. Clara found herself watching Jake, noting the way the firelight played across his features, the way his hands rested easy on his knees like a man comfortable in his own skin. There was something calming about his presence, something that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before her mother died. "Tell me about the horses," she said, wanting to hear his voice again. "The ones you are tracking." Jake leaned back against the wall, his long legs stretched out before him. "It is a string of about 20 animals, good stock from what I understand. They disappeared from a ranch called the Silver Creek spread about a week ago. Owner is convinced it was the Dalton gang. They have been hitting ranches all through the foothills, taking horses and cattle and anything else that is not nailed down. Sheriff cannot seem to catch them. Are they dangerous? Dangerous enough. They have killed at least 2 men that I know of, both ranch hands who tried to stop them. But I am getting paid $50 to track them, and I need the money. My brother and we are planning to pool our resources and start fresh somewhere. Maybe Montana or Wyoming, where the land is still cheap and a man can make something of himself. $50 to risk your life. That does not seem like much. It is what it is. Besides, I am good at what I do. I grew up tracking game in these mountains, and men are not so different from deer when it comes down to it. They leave trails, make patterns, get predictable." Clara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You sound confident. I am alive, which means I am doing something right." The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse, the wind screaming through the trees outside like a woman in pain. Clara knew she should be frightened, alone in a shed with a strange man and a storm that could tear the whole structure apart. But instead she felt calm, almost peaceful. There was something about Jake Garrett that put her at ease, something honest and straightforward that she had rarely encountered in men. How long do you think it will last? She asked. The storm. Hard to say. Could be all night, could break before dawn. These mountain storms are unpredictable. He stood and moved to check on the horses, running a hand down his gelding's neck. The animal nickered softly, pressing into his touch. But we have enough wood for the fire and the roof is not leaking too badly. We will be fine. Clara stood as well, her legs stiff from sitting. She moved to her mare, who had calmed considerably since they entered the shed. Thank you for letting her stay. She has been a good companion these past weeks. What is her name? Rosie. I bought her from a farmer outside Sacramento. She is not the fastest horse, but she has heart. Jake smiled, and Clara noticed how it transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger, less worn by life's disappointments. Heart counts for more than speed most days. My boy there is called Dust, on account of the color of his coat and his tendency to kick it up when he gets running. Clara found herself smiling back. That is a good name. He is a good horse. Saved my life more than once, though do not tell him that. His head is already big enough. They stood in companionable silence, tending to the horses. Clara felt the knots in her shoulders begin to ease, the constant tension that had been her companion since leaving San Francisco finally loosening its grip. Out here in this small shed with the storm raging and a stranger who was somehow not a stranger, she felt like she could finally breathe. Are you hungry? Jake asked. I have some jerky and hardtack in my pack. Not much, but it will fill your belly. I have some bread and cheese in my satchel. We could share. That sounds like a feast. They settled back by the fire, pooling their meager supplies. The bread was a bit stale and the cheese had seen better days, but combined with Jake's jerky and a canteen of water, it felt like the finest meal Clara had eaten in weeks. They ate slowly, neither of them speaking, just existing together in the warmth and relative safety of the shed. Can I ask you something? Jake said finally, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. You already did, but yes, he grinned at that. Fair point. I was wondering, what will you do in Colombia? You said you are looking for work, but doing what? Clara had been asking herself the same question for days. I am not sure. I can read and write and do figures. I worked as a bookkeeper for my father's shipping business before he lost it. Maybe I can find something similar, though I know most men do not like the idea of a woman handling their accounts. Their loss. A smart woman is worth 10 dumb men any day. You are in the minority with that opinion. Then most men are fools. Jake tossed a piece of wood into the stove, sending sparks flying. My mother could outthink, outwork, and outmaneuver any man I ever met. She ran our household, managed the money, and kept food on the table even when my father drank away most of his wages. If more women were in charge of things, the world would probably run a damn sight better. Clara felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. I just wish she had left sooner, before my father broke so much of her spirit, but I understand why she stayed as long as she did. Women do not have many options in this world, especially when they have children to protect. No, Clara agreed quietly. We do not. They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence, heavy with understanding and shared experience. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the world, but inside the shed felt warm and safe and separate from everything else. Clara found her eyes growing heavy, the exhaustion of weeks of running finally catching up with her. You should sleep, Jake said, noticing her drooping eyelids. I will keep watch, make sure the fire does not go out. I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking, I am offering. Besides, I am used to sleeping light and waking easy, comes with the territory. Clara wanted to protest, but her body betrayed her with a jaw-cracking yawn. Are you sure? I am sure. Take the blanket, find a comfortable spot, and rest. You are safe here, Miss Foster, I give you my word." And somehow, despite every lesson life had taught her about trusting men and their promises, Clara believed him. She took the blanket and made herself a nest in a corner of the shed where the hay was piled deep and soft. As she settled in, pulling the blanket up to her chin, she watched Jake add more wood to the fire and check the door to make sure it was secured against the wind. "Garrett," she called softly. He turned, his face half in shadow. "Yes, thank you for everything. Get some sleep, Clara." It was the first time he had used her given name, and she liked the way it sounded in his rough voice, liked it more than she probably should. She closed her eyes, listening to the storm and the crackle of the fire and the steady sound of Jake moving about the shed. Within minutes, she was asleep. Clara woke to pale gray light filtering through the cracks in the walls and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment she was disoriented, wondering where she was and why her bed felt like hay. Then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly, pushing her tangled hair out of her face. Jake sat by the stove, his back to her, feeding sticks into the fire. A battered tin coffee pot sat on top of the stove, steam rising from its spout. He had put his hat on, the brim pulled low, and in the morning light he looked like something from a dime novel, all hard edges and quiet competence. "Good morning," Clara said, her voice rough from sleep. Jake turned and she saw that he looked tired, shadows under his eyes that had not been there the night before. "Morning. Storm passed about 2 hours ago. I let you sleep. You stayed up all night. Like I said, I am used to it." He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "It is not fancy, but it is hot and strong." Clara took the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The coffee was indeed strong, bitter enough to make her wince, but it chased away the last cobwebs of sleep. "Thank you." "You are welcome." Jake poured himself a cup and sat back down, stretching his long legs out before him. "I was thinking, if you are heading to Columbia, we could ride in together. My meeting with the foreman is not until this afternoon, so I have time to make sure you get there safely." Clara's first instinct was to refuse. She had been taking care of herself for weeks now, and she did not need a man to escort her anywhere. But even as the words formed in her mouth, she found herself hesitating. The truth was, she had felt safer in this shed with Jake Garrett than she had felt anywhere since leaving San Francisco. And the idea of riding into Columbia alone, of facing whatever awaited her there without anyone at her back, suddenly felt overwhelming. "I would like that," she said finally. "If it is not too much trouble." "No trouble at all. Besides, Dust could use the company. He gets ornery when it is just the two of us for too long." They drank their coffee in silence, watching the morning light grow stronger. Outside, the world looked scrubbed clean by the storm, the air sharp and clear and full of birdsong. Clara felt her spirits lift despite everything, despite the debts and the running and the uncertain future. There was something about a fresh morning after a storm that made anything seem possible. They saddled the horses and packed their gear, working in easy tandem like they had been doing it together for years instead of hours. Jake insisted Clara keep the blanket, refusing to take no for an answer. When they finally stepped outside, Clara gasped at the view. The mountains stretched out before them in shades of green and gold, the valley below a patchwork of fields and forests. Columbia was visible in the distance, a cluster of buildings huddled along a creek that flashed silver in the sunlight. The sky was a brilliant blue, washed clean by the storm, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. "Beautiful, is it not?" Jake said, swinging into his saddle with easy grace. "It is," Clara agreed, mounting Rosie. "I have been so focused on running that I forgot to look around." That is the thing about running. It keeps your eyes on what is behind you instead of what is ahead. He turned dust toward the trail leading down to the valley. "Come on, let us go see what Columbia has to offer." They rode at an easy pace, letting the horses pick their way down the muddy trail. The morning sun warmed Clara's back, and she found herself relaxing in the saddle, her body swaying with Rosie's gait. Jake rode slightly ahead, but not so far that they could not talk, and he pointed out landmarks as they went. "That creek there, that is Silver Creek. It runs all the way down from the high country through Columbia and eventually meets up with the Stanislaus River. The mining camps use it for their sluices. The ranch I am working for is about 5 miles upstream from town." "Have you been to Columbia before?" Clara asked. "A few times." "It is a decent town, smaller than it used to be now that the gold rush has mostly played out. But there is still enough mining going on to keep things lively. Lots of saloons, couple of hotels, a few good restaurants, church on the corner of Main and State if you are the praying type." "I used to be. I am not sure what I am anymore." Jake glanced back at her, his expression thoughtful. "I reckon faith is a personal thing. Some people find comfort in it, others do not. Me, I figure if there is a God, he has got bigger things to worry about than whether I show up to church on Sunday. But I try to live decent, treat people right. That has to count for something. I think it does." They rode in silence for a while, the trail widening as they descended into the valley. Clara noticed other travelers now, miners heading up into the hills with their pans and picks, a wagon loaded with supplies creaking past them on its way to town. Everyone nodded to Jake, and he touched his hat brim in response, but no one stopped to chat. Mountain people minded their own business, Clara realized, and she was grateful for it. As they drew closer to Columbia, the traffic increased. More wagons, more riders, people on foot with packs on their backs. The town itself was larger than Clara had expected, with wooden buildings lining wide streets and boardwalks that kept pedestrians out of the mud. Signs advertised everything from dry goods to dentistry, and the sound of a piano drifted from one of the saloons even though it was barely 9 in the morning. Jake led her to a hotel on Main Street, a 2-story building with fresh paint and lace curtains in the windows. He dismounted and tied dust to the hitching rail, then came around to help Clara down. His hand spanned her waist as he lifted her from the saddle, and Clara felt an unexpected jolt of awareness at his touch. "This is the best hotel in town," Jake said, seemingly unaware of her reaction. "Mrs. Henderson runs it. She is a widow, good woman, fair prices. You will be safe here." Clara looked at the hotel, then at Jake. "I cannot afford to stay in a hotel. I need to make my money last. Mrs. Henderson is always looking for help. Kitchen work, cleaning, that sort of thing. If you offer to work in exchange for a room, she will probably take you up on it, at least until you find something better." It was a good idea, practical and immediate. Clara nodded, squaring her shoulders. "Thank you for the suggestion and for getting me here safely. You are welcome." Jake stood there, his hands shoved in his pockets, looking like he wanted to say something but was not sure how. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Listen, I will be in town for a few days while we track these horses. If you need anything, word usually finds me at the Silver Dollar Saloon. That is where most of the ranch hands gather. I will remember that." They stood there on the boardwalk, neither of them moving. Clara knew she should go inside, start the next chapter of her life, but she found herself reluctant to say goodbye to this man who had shown her unexpected kindness when she needed it most. "Clara," Jake said finally, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "I know you have been through a lot, and I know you can take care of yourself. But if those men from San Francisco do come looking for you, if you need help, you come find me. Understand? I cannot ask you to fight my battles. You are not asking, I am offering." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I do not know what it is about you, but I feel like we were meant to cross paths yesterday. Like that storm happened just so we would end up in that shed together. Maybe I am crazy, but I would like to see you again. Not because you need help, but because I want to know you better. Clara's breath caught. She had not let herself think about Jake that way, had not let herself acknowledge the pull she felt toward him. But standing here with his hand warm around hers and his eyes searching her face, she could not deny it anymore. I would like that too, she admitted quietly. Jake's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Good. Then I will come find you when I get back from this job. We can have dinner, talk, see where things go. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other. That sounds nice. He squeezed her hand once more, then released it and stepped back. You better go on in before Mrs. Henderson thinks you are loitering. And Clara. Be careful, keep that pistol close. I will, you be careful too. Those horse thieves sound dangerous. I will be fine. I have been doing this a long time. Jake mounted Dust in one fluid motion, settling into the saddle like he was born there. He touched his hat brim to Clara, then turned the horse and rode away down Main Street. Clara watched until he disappeared around a corner, then took a deep breath and walked into the hotel. The lobby was small but clean, with a polished front desk and a staircase leading up to the second floor. A woman in her 50s stood behind the desk, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and her dress pressed and proper. She looked up as Clara entered, her sharp eyes taking in Clara's travel-stained clothes and wind-blown hair. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but cautious. "Mrs. Henderson? My name is Clara Foster. I am new to Columbia and looking for work. A friend suggested that you might need help in exchange for a room." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly. "What kind of work can you do?" "I can cook, clean, keep books. I worked as a bookkeeper in San Francisco before I came here." "Can you handle difficult customers? We get all types through here, and some of them have had too much to drink or think a woman running a hotel is an invitation to be inappropriate." Clara met her eyes steadily. "I can handle difficult men. I have had plenty of practice." Something in her voice must have convinced Mrs. Henderson, because the older woman nodded. "I can offer you a small room on the second floor and 2 meals a day in exchange for 6 hours of work. You would help me with breakfast service, clean rooms, and handle some of the bookkeeping. I have arthritis in my hands and the figures are getting harder to manage. We can try it for a week, see how we both feel about the arrangement." "That sounds more than fair. Thank you." "Do not thank me yet. You have not seen how demanding some of these miners can be at 6 in the morning when they want their coffee." But Mrs. Henderson was smiling as she came around the desk with a key. "Let me show you to your room. You can get settled, clean up, and start work tomorrow morning. I assume you need today to rest." Clara followed her up the stairs, past doors with brass numbers, to a small room at the end of the hall. It was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it had a window that looked out over the street and a door that locked from the inside. To Clara, it felt like a palace. "Breakfast is at 6, dinner at 7, Mrs. Henderson said. "There is a bathhouse 2 doors down if you need to wash up properly. Water closet is at the end of the hall. Any questions?" "No, madam, thank you again." Mrs. Henderson studied her for a moment, and Clara had the feeling she saw more than Clara wanted her to. "You are running from something." It was not a question, but Clara answered anyway. "Yes. Are you going to bring trouble to my hotel?" "I hope not, but I cannot guarantee it." The older woman nodded slowly. "I appreciate the honesty. Most girls in your position would lie. Here is what I will say. I do not care what you are running from so long as you work hard and keep your nose clean." But if men show up looking for you, I expect you to handle it without involving my other guests or damaging my property. Fair. Fair. Good. Then welcome to Columbia, Miss Foster. I hope you find what you are looking for here." After Mrs. Henderson left, Clara sat on the narrow bed and let herself feel the full weight of exhaustion that had been chasing her for weeks. She had made it to Columbia. She had a room, a job, and a chance to start over. And she had met Jake Garrett, a man who made her feel things she thought she had forgotten how to feel. It was not safety, not exactly. It was possibility. Hope. The sense that maybe, just maybe, her story did not have to be one of running and hiding forever. Maybe there was room for something else, something better. Clara stood and moved to the window, looking out at the bustling street below. Somewhere out there, Jake was preparing to track down dangerous men. She sent up a silent prayer to a God she was not sure she believed in anymore, asking that he come back safely. Then she unpacked her small bag, washed her face and hands in the basin, and tried to rest. But sleep would not come. Her mind kept circling back to the shed, to the storm, to the way Jake's hand had felt holding hers. She barely knew him, had spent less than 12 hours in his company, yet something had shifted inside her during that time. Some wall she had built around her heart had developed a crack, and she was not sure if she should try to repair it or let it crumble completely. Eventually, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. Mrs. Henderson was in the kitchen behind the lobby, and she put Clara to work peeling potatoes and chopping vegetables for dinner. It felt good to have something to do with her hands, good to focus on simple tasks that had clear outcomes. They worked in companionable silence, and Clara found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. That night, lying in her narrow bed with the sounds of the town filtering through her window, Clara let herself think about Jake. About his smile and his rough voice, and the way he had stayed awake all night to let her sleep. About the way he talked about his mother and his brother, the love and pain both evident in his words. About the way he had offered to help her, no strings attached, just because it was the right thing to do. She had not been looking for romance, had not thought herself capable of it after everything she had been through. But Jake Garrett had walked into her life, or rather she had stumbled into his, and now she could not seem to stop thinking about when she would see him again. The days passed in a blur of work and routine. Clara fell into the rhythm of hotel life, rising before dawn to help Mrs. Henderson prepare breakfast for the guests, spending her afternoons cleaning rooms and changing linens, and her evenings managing the hotel's books. She was good at the work, efficient and thorough, and Mrs. Henderson quickly came to rely on her. On her 4th day in Columbia, Clara was scrubbing the front steps when a man rode up on a dusty horse. He was tall and thin, with cold eyes and a face that looked like it had never smiled. He dismounted slowly, his gaze sweeping over Clara in a way that made her skin crawl. "This the Henderson Hotel?" he asked. "It is," Clara said, not standing up. She kept her hands in the bucket, her fingers closing around the handle of the scrub brush in case she needed a weapon. "I am looking for someone. Young woman, dark hair, traveling alone. Goes by the name of Clara Foster." "Seen anyone like that?" Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face blank. "Lots of people come through here. I do not keep track of names." The man's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that? I would hate to think you were lying to me. I am sure." Clara stood now, the brush still in her hand. "If you want to ask Mrs. Henderson, you can go inside, but she will tell you the same thing I did. We respect our guests' privacy." The man stared at her for a long moment, and Clara met his gaze without flinching. Finally, he spat into the street and remounted his horse. "Tell Mrs. Henderson I will be back, and if I find out you are lying, there will be consequences." He rode away, and Clara waited until he was out of sight before she allowed herself to shake. Her instincts had been right. The men from San Francisco had found her. She had maybe a day, maybe two, before they came back with more questions and less patience. She needed to find Jake. Clara finished the steps quickly, then went inside and found Mrs. Henderson. "I need to go out for a few hours." "That man who was just here, he is looking for me." Mrs. Henderson's expression tightened. "I figured as much. What did you do?" "Nothing. My father owed them money and they think I should pay his debts." "How much?" $3,000. Mrs. Henderson let out a low whistle. "That is a considerable sum. You do not have it, I assume." "No." The older woman nodded slowly. "Then you need to either run again or find a way to make them leave you alone. I am guessing you are leaning toward the latter, or you would already be gone." "There is someone who might be able to help. A friend. I need to find him." "Then go, but Clara, be careful. Men like that, they do not take no for an answer easily." Clara changed into her riding clothes and saddled Rosie, her hands moving automatically despite the fear thrumming through her veins. She rode to the Silver Dollar Saloon and tied her horse outside, ignoring the stares from the men loitering on the boardwalk. Women did not frequent saloons, but Clara did not care about propriety right now. She needed Jake. The interior of the saloon was dark and smoky, smelling of whiskey and sawdust. A dozen men stood at the bar or sat at tables, and every single one of them turned to look when Clara walked in. The piano player stopped mid-song, his hands frozen over the keys. "I am looking for Jake Garrett," Clara said, her voice steady despite the attention. "Is he here?" "He is not here, sweetheart," the bartender said, his tone somewhere between amused and concerned. "Left this morning with the Silver Creek crew to track those stolen horses. Probably will not be back for a few days." Clara's heart sank. "Do you know where they went?" "Up into the high country, that is all I know. They were following tracks that led north and east. Could be anywhere by now." Clara nodded, trying to think. She could not wait a few days. The men from San Francisco would be back sooner than that, and she needed to be ready. "If he comes back, tell him Clara Foster is looking for him. Tell him it is important." "I will tell him, miss. You all right? You look pale." "I am fine. Thank you." Clara walked out of the saloon and stood on the boardwalk, trying to decide what to do. She could run again, pack her things and ride out before the men came back. But she was tired of running. Tired of looking over her shoulder. Tired of starting over in new towns with new names. She had found something in Colombia, something fragile and new and worth fighting for. She was not ready to give that up. She was so lost in thought that she did not hear the horse approaching until it was right beside her. She looked up to find Jake sitting on dust, his hat brim shadowing his face. He was covered in trail dust and looked like he had not slept in days, but his eyes were bright and focused on her. "I heard you were looking for me," he said. Clara felt relief crash over her like a wave. "You are back. I thought you would be gone for days. We found the horses this morning, got them back to the ranch by noon. The thieves had them penned up in a canyon about 15 miles from here. We managed to recover the whole herd without any gunplay, which was a nice change." He dismounted and moved to stand beside her, his voice dropping low. "The bartender said you looked scared. What happened?" Clara told him about the man, about the questions and the thinly veiled threat. Jake's jaw tightened as she spoke, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "How many of them are there?" he asked when she finished. "I do not know. At least 3, maybe more. They work for a loan shark in San Francisco named Carver. He is the one my father owed the money to." "And they expect you to pay it?" "Yes." Jake was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. Then he looked at her, and there was something hard and determined in his eyes. "All right. Here is what we are going to do. You are going to go back to the hotel and pack your things." I am going to ask around, find out where these men are staying and how many of them there are. Then we are going to end this. Jake, I cannot ask you to fight for me. You are not asking. I am offering." He took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "Clara, I do not know what this is between us, but I know I cannot walk away and leave you to face this alone. Let me help, please." Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him she could handle it herself. But the truth was she was scared, and she was tired of being alone. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. We have not solved anything, but we will." He squeezed her hands once more, then released them. "Go on. Get your things and wait at the hotel. I will come for you when I know more." Clara rode back to the hotel, her mind racing. Mrs. Henderson met her at the door, and one look at Clara's face told her everything she needed to know. "Your friend is going to help?" she asked. "Yes." "Good, you go pack. I will keep watch. If those men come back, I will delay them as long as I can." Clara packed quickly, her hands shaking as she rolled up her spare dress and tucked her mother's ring into her pocket. She checked her pistol, making sure it was loaded, then sat on the bed to wait. The minutes crawled by like hours, each sound from the street below making her jump. Finally, there was a knock at her door. Clara grabbed her pistol, but it was Jake's voice that called out, "It is me. Open up." She unlocked the door and found Jake standing in the hallway, his expression grim. "There are 4 of them," he said without preamble. "They are staying at a boarding house on the edge of town. I talked to a few people who have seen them around. They have been asking questions about you at every hotel and saloon in Colombia. It is only a matter of time before they come back here. So what do? We go talk to them. We make them understand that you are not paying that debt and they need to leave you alone." Clara shook her head. "They will not listen. Men like Carver, they do not care about reason or fairness. They just want their money. Then we will have to convince them another way." Jake's hand moved to the gun at his hip, and Clara understood what he was not saying. "I do not want you to kill for me. I do not want to kill anyone, but I will if it means keeping you safe." He stepped closer, his hand cupping her cheek. "Clara, I know we have not known each other long. But I care about you, more than I probably should, and I am not going to stand by and let these men hurt you. Do you understand?" Clara covered his hand with hers, leaning into his touch. "I understand, but promise me you will be careful. Promise me you will not take unnecessary risks." "I promise." He leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers, and they stood there for a moment, breathing together. Then Jake stepped back, his expression hardening into something focused and dangerous. "Let us go end this." They rode together through the streets of Colombia, side by side. Jake led them to the boarding house, a run-down building that looked like it had seen better days. 4 horses stood tied outside, and Clara recognized the one the man had been riding that morning. "Wait here," Jake said, dismounting. "No, this is my fight too." Jake looked like he wanted to argue, but he must have seen the determination in her eyes because he nodded. "Stay behind me. If shooting starts, you get down and you stay down. Understood?" "Understood." They walked into the boarding house together. The 4 men were in the common room playing cards at a table. They looked up as Jake and Clara entered, and the thin man from that morning stood slowly, his hand moving to his gun. "Well now," he said, "look who came to visit, and she brought a friend." "My name is Jake Garrett," Jake said, his voice calm and level. "And I am here to tell you that Clara Foster does not owe you or anyone else a damn thing. Her father's debts died with him. You are going to get on your horses and ride back to San Francisco, and you are going to tell your boss Carver that he will not be getting his money. Not from Clara, not from anyone." The thin man laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "Is that so? And what makes you think we are going to listen to some cowboy who does not have the sense to mind his own business? Because if you do not, I am going to make it my business to ensure you regret it." The other 3 men stood now, forming a line beside their companion. They were all armed, all dangerous looking. Clara felt her heart hammering, but she kept her hand steady on her pistol. 4 against 2, one of the men said. "I like those odds." "Then you are dumber than you look," Jake replied. "Because I have killed more men than I care to count, and every single one of them thought they had the advantage. The difference is, I am still standing and they are not." There was a beat of silence, heavy and tense. Clara could see the men calculating, weighing their options. Then the thin man's hand flashed toward his gun, and everything happened at once. Jake drew and fired in one smooth motion, so fast Clara barely saw it happen. The thin man's gun fell from his hand as he clutched his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. The other 3 men froze, their hands hovering over their weapons. "Next one will not be a shoulder wound," Jake said, his gun steady. "It will be right between your eyes. Now, are we going to keep playing this game, or are you going to listen to reason?" One of the men slowly raised his hands. "We are listening." "Good." Jake's voice was cold as winter ice. "Here is how this is going to go. You are going to bandage up your friend there. Then all 4 of you are going to get on your horses and ride out of Columbia. You are going to go back to San Francisco and tell Carver that Clara Foster is under my protection now. If he has a problem with that, he can come find me himself. But I promise you, he will not like what happens if he does. Are we clear?" The men nodded, helping their wounded companion to his feet. The thin man glared at Clara, his face twisted with pain and fury. "Carver is not going to let this go. He does not like being told no." "Then Carver is a fool," Jake said. "And fools do not live long in my experience. Now get out of my sight before I change my mind about letting you live." The 4 men stumbled out of the boarding house, and Clara heard them mount up and ride away. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did Jake holster his gun. He turned to Clara, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" Clara realized she was shaking. "You shot him." "I had to. He was going to draw on us, and I could not let that happen." Jake moved closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I am sorry you had to see that, but it is over now. They will go back to San Francisco and they will tell Carver what happened. He might send more men, but I doubt it. Men like him, they only fight battles they know they can win. And now he knows you have someone willing to fight for you. What if he does send more men? What if he comes himself? Then I will deal with it. And if it gets too dangerous here, we will leave. Go somewhere Carver cannot find us." Jake's hand slid down to take hers. "I meant what I said in there. You are under my protection now. That means something to me. It means I am not going anywhere." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me. I know enough." Jake pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. Clara let herself lean into him, let herself take comfort in his solid warmth. "I know you are brave and smart and stronger than you think. I know you have been through hell and you are still standing. And I know that when I am with you, I feel like I have finally found something worth fighting for. That is enough for me." Clara pulled back enough to look up at him. "I care about you too, more than I should after such a short time. Then stop fighting it. Let yourself feel it. Let yourself be happy, even if it is scary and uncertain. Life is too short to do anything else." And then Jake was kissing her, his lips warm and firm against hers. Clara kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope and longing into it. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "Come on," he said softly. "Let us get out of here. I want to show you something." They rode out of Columbia, leaving the town behind as they climbed into the foothills. Jake led Clara to a high meadow where wildflowers bloomed in riotous colors, and a creek ran clear and cold over smooth stones. They dismounted and stood looking out over the valley, the world spread out below them like a painting. "This is where I come when I need to think," Jake said. "When everything feels like too much, and I need to remember why I keep going. It helps to see how big the world is, how small our problems are in the grand scheme of things." Clara understood what he meant. Standing here with the wind in her hair and the sun on her face, the fear that had been her constant companion for weeks felt manageable. Not gone, but smaller. Less all-consuming. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for protecting me, for believing in me, for making me feel like I am not alone." "You are not alone, not anymore." Jake took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I know this is fast. I know we are jumping into something without really knowing where it will lead, but I do not care. When you know, and I know I want to be with you. I want to see where this goes." Clara turned to face him fully, her free hand coming up to cup his jaw. "I want that too. I am scared, but I want it. Being scared is natural. Hell, I am scared too, but I would rather be scared with you than safe without you." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it. When they finally pulled apart, Jake pulled Clara down to sit beside him in the grass. They spent the afternoon there, talking about everything and nothing. Jake told her about his childhood in the mountains, about learning to track and shoot and survive. Clara told him about her life in San Francisco, about the mother she lost and the father who had been more burden than blessing. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake turned to Clara with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something, about my plans." "All right. My brother and we have been saving money to buy land and start a new ranch, somewhere far from California, somewhere we can build something lasting. I have enough saved now, and once I collect my pay from the Silver Creek job, I will have even more. I was planning to leave Columbia in a few weeks to meet him in Montana." Clara felt her heart sink. "Oh, but that was before I met you." Jake took both her hands in his. "Clara, I do not want to go to Montana without you. I want you to come with me. I want us to build something together, start fresh where no one knows us and no one can find us. I know it is a lot to ask. I know I am asking you to trust me with your whole future, but I am asking anyway." Clara stared at him, her mind whirling. Leave California, leave everything she knew and ride off into the unknown with a man she had known for less than a week. It was insane, it was reckless, it was possibly the worst decision she could make. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I will go with you." Jake's smile was blinding. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You will not regret this. I promise you, Clara. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you do not regret this." "I already do not regret it," Clara whispered into his shoulder. "For the first time in years, I feel like I am moving towards something instead of running away. That is worth any risk." They stayed in the meadow until the stars came out, wrapped in each other's arms and making plans. They would leave Columbia in 2 weeks, giving Clara time to say goodbye to Mrs. Henderson and Jake time to settle his affairs and collect his pay. They would travel north and east, taking their time, seeing the country. In Montana, they would meet Jake's brother and use their combined savings to buy land. They would build a house, start a ranch, make a life. It was a dream, fragile and uncertain. But it was theirs, and that made it precious. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Clara worked her shifts at the hotel and spent every spare moment with Jake. They went riding in the foothills, had dinner at the small restaurant on Main Street, and sat on the hotel porch in the evenings talking until the moon was high. Clara learned that Jake loved horses more than anything, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he sang when he thought no one was listening. Jake learned that Clara could shoot as well as any man, that she had a sharp mind for business, that she laughed like she had forgotten how and was just remembering. They fell in love slowly, and then all at once, the way a creek becomes a river. By the time their departure day arrived, Clara could not imagine her life without Jake in it. Mrs. Henderson was sorry to see Clara go but understood. "You have found something rare," she told Clara as they said goodbye. "A good man who sees you as an equal. Do not let him go." "I will not," Clara promised. They left Columbia on a clear June morning, riding north with the sun at their backs. Clara looked over her shoulder once, watching the town disappear behind them, and felt no regret, only excitement for what lay ahead. The journey to Montana took 6 weeks. They traveled slowly, stopping in small towns to rest and resupply, camping under the stars when the weather was fair. Clara had never felt so free, so unburdened by the past. With Jake beside her, the future felt full of possibility. They crossed through Nevada, where the desert stretched endless and brutal. They climbed through Idaho, where the mountains soared so high Clara felt like she could touch the sky. And finally, they reached Montana, where the land rolled out in waves of grass and the sky went on forever. Jake's brother was waiting for them at a small ranch outside of a town called Willow Creek. His name was Joseph Garrett, and he was 2 years younger than Jake, with the same dark hair and whiskey eyes. He greeted Clara warmly, clearly delighted that his brother had found someone. "I was starting to think Jake was going to spend his whole life alone," Joseph said with a grin. "Too stubborn to let anyone in." "She wore me down," Jake replied, but he was smiling as he said it. The 3 of them spent the next few weeks searching for land. They found it in a valley sheltered by mountains, with a creek running through it and enough grazing land for a good-sized herd. It was perfect. They bought it with their pooled savings and got to work building. Those were hard months, filled with back-breaking labor and setbacks. But they were also some of the happiest of Clara's life. She worked alongside Jake and Joseph, helping to raise the walls of their house, planting a vegetable garden, learning to manage the small herd of cattle they purchased. Jake proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to rope and brand, how to read the weather and the land. At night, exhausted and covered in dust, Clara and Jake would lie under the stars and dream out loud about their future. They talked about children, about expanding the ranch, about growing old together. And every night, Jake would pull Clara close and tell her he loved her, and Clara would say it back, meaning it more each time. In October, with the house finished and the first snows threatening in the mountains, Jake asked Clara to marry him. There was no ring, no grand gesture. They were sitting on the porch they had built together, watching the sun set over their land, and he simply turned to her and said, "Will you marry me, Clara Foster? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you make me?" Clara did not hesitate. "Yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in Willow Creek 2 weeks later in a small church with Joseph as their witness. Clara wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, and Jake wore his best shirt and a tie that Joseph had to help him knot. The ceremony was brief, the vows simple. But when Jake kissed his bride, Clara felt like her whole life had been leading to this moment. That winter was harsh, with blizzards that buried the valley under feet of snow. But Clara and Jake weathered it together, snug in their new home with a fire in the hearth and food in the pantry. Joseph had his own small cabin on the other side of the property, giving the newlyweds privacy. They spent the long winter nights learning each other, building a foundation of intimacy and trust that would sustain them through whatever came next. Spring arrived in a rush of meltwater and wildflowers. The cattle survived the winter with minimal losses, and Jake and Joseph began planning to expand the herd. Clara discovered she was pregnant in April, and Jake was so overjoyed he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." Clara gave birth the following January, laboring through a long night with Jake holding her hand and refusing to leave her side despite the midwife's protests that men did not belong in birthing rooms. Their son came into the world screaming, healthy and perfect, with his father's dark hair and his mother's nose. They named him Samuel, after Jake's grandfather. Jake held his son with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face, and Clara thought she had never seen anything more beautiful than her husband cradling their child. The years that followed were not always easy. The ranch demanded constant work, and there were lean times when the weather did not cooperate or the cattle prices dropped. But Clara and Jake faced every challenge together, their partnership deepening with each passing season. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Elizabeth who came 3 years after Samuel, and another son named Thomas who arrived 2 years after that. The house that had felt so spacious when it was just the 2 of them filled with noise and laughter and chaos. Clara sometimes looked around at the life they had built and marveled at how far she had come from that desperate woman hiding in a shed from a storm. Jake proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful with their children. He taught Samuel to ride and rope, helped Elizabeth build a treehouse, and carried Thomas on his shoulders while doing evening chores. And every night, no matter how tired he was, he would find Clara and pull her close and tell her he loved her. Joseph eventually married a schoolteacher from Willow Creek, a kind woman named Margaret who fit seamlessly into their family. They had children of their own, and the ranch became a place of community and connection, exactly what Jake and Clara had dreamed it could be. Clara never heard from Carver or his men again. She sometimes wondered if they were still looking for her, or if they had moved on to other debts and other victims. But mostly, she did not think about them at all. The past felt like it belonged to a different person, a different life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jake took Clara back to the meadow where he had first told her he wanted her to come to Montana with him. Their children were staying with Joseph and Margaret for the night, giving them rare time alone. They spread a blanket on the grass and lay looking up at the stars, just like they had all those years ago. "You ever regret it?" Jake asked quietly. "Leaving California, tying yourself to me when you barely knew me?" Clara rolled onto her side to look at him, this man who had shown her what love could be. His hair was longer now, threaded with silver at the temples. His face was more lined, weathered by years of sun and wind. But his eyes were the same, warm and steady and full of devotion. "Not for one single second," she said. "You gave me everything, Jake. A home, a family, a life I did not know I could have. You took a woman who was running and gave her a reason to stay. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that storm that brought us together." Jake pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I am the grateful one. You made me believe in second chances and fresh starts. You made me want to be better, do better. Everything good in my life started the day you stumbled into my shed." They made love under the stars, slow and tender, reaffirming the commitment they had made to each other a decade ago. And when they finally headed home in the small hours of the morning, riding through the darkness toward the lights of their ranch, Clara felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. The years continued to pass. Their children grew, and the ranch prospered. Samuel eventually took over most of the day-to-day operations, allowing Jake and Clara to step back and enjoy their grandchildren when they started arriving. Elizabeth married a doctor and moved to Billings, while Thomas stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and brother. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered to celebrate. There were children and grandchildren everywhere, the house bursting with noise and life. Jake stood to make a toast, and the room fell silent. 30 years ago, he said, looking at Clara, I met a woman in a storm. She was scared and alone and running from a past that was not her fault. I offered her shelter, and she gave me everything in return. She gave me love, family, a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive. Clara Foster Garrett, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Here is to 30 more years, and then 30 after that, and then as many as we can steal from this life. Everyone cheered and clinked glasses, but Clara only had eyes for Jake. He came to her side and took her hand, and they slipped out onto the porch where the noise was muffled and the stars were bright overhead. Thank you, Clara said softly, for everything, for seeing me, for choosing me, for building this life with me. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, Jake replied. Every single moment, good and bad, because they all led us here. They stood together on the porch they had built with their own hands, looking out over the land they had carved from wilderness. Their children's laughter drifted through the open windows, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The wind whispered through the grass, and Clara thought about that long-ago storm, about the shed where everything had changed. She had been hiding from a storm, and a cowboy had said, "Hide in my arms and weather every storm." And he had meant it, had proven it over and over again through 3 decades of love and partnership. Jake Garrett had kept his promise, had sheltered her through every storm life threw at them. And she had done the same for him. As they grew older, Jake and Clara settled into a comfortable rhythm. They spent their mornings on the porch with coffee, watching the sun rise over their land. They took long rides into the hills, just the two of them, reminiscing about the early days when everything was new and uncertain. They visited their children and spoiled their grandchildren shamelessly. Jake's hair went completely silver, and arthritis settled into his hands, making it harder to rope and ride like he used to. But his mind stayed sharp, and his love for Clara never wavered. Clara developed a limp from an old injury that never quite healed right, and her eyesight began to fade, making it harder to read the books she loved. But she could always see Jake clearly, could always find him in any room. On the night of their 40th anniversary, they lay in the bed they had shared for 4 decades, wrapped in each other's arms. The house was quiet, the family celebrations over, and it was just the two of them again, the way it had always been at the core of everything. "I love you," Jake whispered into the darkness. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Clara whispered back, "in this life and whatever comes after." They fell asleep that way, holding each other, two souls who had found each other in a storm and never let go. Jake passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 84. He simply did not wake up one morning, his hand still holding Clara's. The doctor said his heart had just stopped, worn out after a long and full life. Clara sat with him for hours, holding his cooling hand, memorizing his face one last time. The funeral was huge, attended by what seemed like half of Montana. Jake had touched so many lives, had been a pillar of the community and a friend to all who knew him. But for Clara, the world had shrunk to the size of a coffin, to the absence of the man who had been her partner in everything. She lived another 3 years, cared for by her children and grandchildren. She spent her days on the porch, looking out over the land Jake had loved, telling stories about their life together to anyone who would listen. And at night, she would lie in their bed and talk to him, certain that somehow, somewhere, he could hear her. Clara died on a June morning, exactly 50 years after the day she had met Jake. The family liked to think she had been waiting for the anniversary, that she had held on just long enough to mark the day that had changed everything. They found her on the porch, a smile on her face, looking peaceful. They buried her next to Jake on a hillside overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land and the family they had built together. The headstone was simple, just their names and the years they had lived. But underneath, Samuel had added one more line. She hid in his arms, and together they weathered every storm. The ranch continued on, passed down through generations. The house Jake and Clara had built was carefully maintained, filled with new families and new stories. But the old-timers in Willow Creek still talked about Jake and Clara Garrett, about the woman who had come to Montana running from her past, and the cowboy who had given her a future. They talked about a love that had started in a storm and lasted a lifetime, about two people who had found each other when they needed it most, and had built something beautiful from nothing. And on summer nights, when storms rolled through the valley, people swore they could see two figures on horseback riding through the rain, a man and a woman side by side, heading home together the way they always had. The story of Clara Foster and Jake Garrett became legend in those parts, passed down from parents to children, from grandparents to grandchildren. It became a story about hope and second chances, about finding love in unexpected places and holding onto it with everything you have. It became a story about weathering storms together, about sheltering each other from life's hardships, about building something lasting in an uncertain world. But more than anything, it became a story about a woman who was hiding from a storm in a shed, and a cowboy who said, "Hide in my arms and weather every storm," and how they both kept that promise for the rest of their lives. Through good times and bad, through joy and sorrow, through every season and every year until death finally parted them. And even then, the love they had built continued on, living in the hearts of their children and their children's children, a legacy more valuable than land or money or anything else they could have left behind. It lived in the values they had instilled, in the example they had set, in the proof that true love was not just a fairy tale, but something real and attainable, and worth fighting for. Samuel often brought his own grandchildren to the graves on the hillside, telling them about their great-grandparents. He told them about Clara's courage, about how she had fled everything she knew to start fresh in a new place. He told them about Jake's integrity, about how he had stood up for what was right even when it was dangerous. He told them about the love that had sustained them through 47 years of marriage, about how they had been partners in the truest sense of the word. "Remember this," Samuel would say, his hand resting on the headstone. "Love is not just about the easy times. It is about choosing each other every day, even when things are hard. It is about being each other's shelter in the storm." Your great-grandparents understood that, and it made all the difference. The children would listen with wide eyes, trying to imagine a world where their great-grandmother had been young and scared and running for her life, where their great-grandfather had been a cowboy tracking horse thieves. It seemed impossibly romantic, like something from one of the dime novels their parents did not want them reading. But it was real. It had happened right here, on this land they called home, and somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Clara and Jake were together still. Not running, not hiding, not fighting. Just being together the way they had always been meant to be, the way that storm had brought them together all those years ago. They were at peace, their storms finally weathered, their love eternal. The land they had claimed from wilderness continued to thrive. The house they had built with their own hands sheltered new generations. The family they had started with nothing but love and determination spread out across Montana and beyond, each member carrying a piece of Clara and Jake's legacy with them. And on certain nights, when the wind was right and the moon was full, You could almost hear it. The sound of laughter from the old house. The creak of the porch swing where Jake and Clara had spent so many evenings. The soft murmur of voices talking late into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams. Some said it was just the wind. Others knew better. They knew it was Clara and Jake still together, still loving each other, still proving that some bonds are too strong for even death to break. They were there in the meadow where wildflowers bloomed. They were there in the shed that had long since fallen to ruin but would never be forgotten. They were there in every storm that rolled through the valley, sheltering each other the way they always had. And that was how the story ended, not with tragedy or loss, but with the continuation of love. With the proof that Clara Foster and Jake Garrett had built something that would last forever, not just in the land or the house or the family, but in the very fabric of the place they had made their own. They had taken a chance on each other in the middle of a storm, and that chance had bloomed into a love story for the ages. It was a story that reminded people what was possible, what could be built when two people committed to weathering every storm together. It was a story about courage and kindness, about seeing someone at their most vulnerable and choosing to protect them rather than exploit them. It was a story about how one moment, one choice, one storm could change everything. And it was a story that would be told and retold for generations to come, growing with each telling but always keeping the essential truth at its core. That somewhere in Montana, in the year 1873, a woman hiding from a storm found shelter in a cowboy's shed. And he looked at her with kind eyes and said, "Hide in my arms and weather every storm." And she did. And he did. And together, they built a love that nothing could destroy, a partnership that became legendary, a life that mattered. That was the story of Clara Foster and Jake Garrett. And it was a good story, the best kind of story, the kind that was true,